Hey everyone, Jason here. I'm going to double check that we are live to make sure we show up like we should. We have a great guest today, and I want to make sure we don't miss any of that for you all. I'm sure it's going to be filled with lots of really good information. And there we go. So we are now live. So, hey there. I'm Jason Logston, and this is Makin Bacon. We're all about helping you serve your fans, grow your income, and get the most out of your blog. Today's episode is sponsored by my very own Web Stories Made Easy email course. You can check that out at makethatbacon.com/webstories. And we've all heard about people excitedly talking about Google Web Stories on social media, in mastermind groups, and on podcasts lately. But what the heck are web stories, and what's the best way to integrate them into your own blog? I wrote up everything that I learned trying to explore what they are, and I created this course for you so that you can understand how to get the most out of them for your own blog. So you can check it out for free at makethatbacon.com/webstories. And remember, you can join us live every Thursday when we record these episodes. You can ask the guests questions, talk to the other bloggers in the comments, and even see our smiling faces. So join us Thursdays at makethatbacon.com/live or search for Makin Bacon on your favorite podcast platform. Now, on to the show. As bloggers, we often focus on the experience people have with our recipes and on our instructions, but we often don't apply that scrutiny to our website, much less our business. But taking the principles of user experience can transform both. There's a lot to take into account, but luckily today's guest is the perfect person to help us out. She's been focused on digital content for more than 20 years. And 6 years ago, she started as a freelance web designer and has since transitioned to providing food bloggers understandable and thorough UX resources, training, and coaching. Can't wait to learn from today's guest, Bethany Smith from foodblogusability.com and Cadia Marketing. Bethany, welcome to Makin Bacon.
Hi, thank you for having me on.
Sorry, I screwed up the company name there. I was like,
No,
I kept practicing it. And
that was fine. I know it's not really, I sort of just made up that word, Cadia. I live in Portland, Oregon, so it actually, I wanted one that had sort of a local feel, so like the Cascades and Cascadia, so I just took the last part, so Cadia.
I like it. I like hearing the origin story of the name too. That always helps.
There is a food brand that's really small that uses that word too, but
nice. Well, you'll have to grow your business to the point where they decide to change their name.
Right.
So I can't wait to dive into all things user experience today. But before we get started, I always like to ask, what is it like around your dinner table on a typical day?
So I've heard you ask this question before. So I knew it was coming. I have a 3-year-old and 5-year-old. So we do try to do a traditional sit-down dinner with them at the table. My husband actually usually cooks. I don't know. He's very he'll do it every day. I like cooking more for special occasions and things. So this kind of sounds like this Norman Rockwell painting, right? But it's not, because they're 3 and 5. So it takes 10 minutes to get all of us to just sit down. And then we're probably only sitting for 3 to 5 minutes at the same time at the table. Young kids, they don't eat long. They don't want dinner. It's so it's quite the process. It's kind of stressful. We try to do no phones or tablets or anything. I mean, my husband and I are the ones who are the worst about breaking that rule. And so
do as I say, not as I do.
Yeah, well, they're not really at the age where I guess they could get their tablet, but they don't really turn things on themselves as much. But yeah, so I mean, it is a nice thing to try to do, but it ends up being kind of stressful. So
I like that your husband cooks for the everyday meals, and then when you have friends and family over and it's time to impress everyone, that's when you step up and take the reins in the kitchen.
Basically, yeah. Well, I really like baking, and so I'll just bake stuff. But yeah, the more cooking, it's okay, but it's not something that I'm super into. Yeah, so I just do the impressive things, and then
it's the way to do it. You get the most bang for your buck.
Well, in baking too, most people get pretty impressed with with anything. Oh, I made cookies. Even if they're super easy, people are like, yes, this is awesome. So
Yeah, I do not bake very often, and it's I'm always impressed by anyone that bakes. Pretty much, it's despite being a really good cook, I'm like, "Ooh, you made like a cake." I don't even know how you would start doing that, and I know it's no harder than making a prime rib roast or something, but I know how that works, so I'm always impressed by
yeah.
everyone else's baking.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, I didn't really understand the difference until more recently, and that people like really categorize the two,
Hmm.
And I was like, oh yeah, I am kind of a baker. Like, that's my thing, right? So yeah, but I'm like, I don't want to cook steak. Like, there's so many elements of that I just don't want to do. So
Yeah, with the baking, you have the precision, you have the strict measuring. You kind of know what you're doing. You're following the formula almost every time, and then you can kind of freelance within that formula. Where cooking is kind of like anything goes and just toss stuff together.
yeah, yeah. So
So I'm really excited to dive into user experience. It's actually something that I've been passionate about since I got started as a web developer like 20 years ago, I think, at this point. For those that aren't familiar about usability and user experience, can you explain what it is all about?
yeah, I mean, it's really this super broad topic, right? Because it kind of can encompass everything. So it's a little hard to talk about. Um, so that's why I like breaking it up into two different parts. And one is um, just like the universal UX principles. So those are things that are true on any website across the web, right? So that would be things like web accessibility, site speed, things that can be measured. There's some sort of standard that's been developed for it. So like with web accessibility, there's the WCAG guidelines, which I don't know if they're actually law anywhere, but the talk is that they probably will be eventually. Um, so that's one aspect of like user experience, usability, right? Those things have been researched and people have decided this is what makes a good experience for the user on the web. The other aspect of it is talking about things specifically for your business and for your blog. And actually, user experience doesn't have to apply just to websites. That's kind of where we've heard about it the most. But any product has a user experience, right? So, like, the iPhone is always the type of example that people give, like when they created that and how it feels and how it looks, even before you get to like the software of it. So, um, user experience is just this process that you can go through for any product, any business. So then there's this other element talking about how do you apply that to your business? How do you go through and you do the research and you figure out what your users, readers, followers, whatever you call them, want for for what you're doing for them. So hopefully that kind of clarifies what we're trying to talk about here.
So let's dive into some of the universal principles first. You mentioned web accessibility. What
Mm-hmm.
does food bloggers specifically have to keep in mind when it comes to website accessibility?
Yeah, I think this is a really important one to talk about because when I'm talking about user experience too, if you get the web accessibility standards right, you're going to be way ahead of the game just in general. For instance, one of the things that it talks about is color contrast. So for people who can't see well, maybe people who aren't even blind, right? But you just like, I have glasses on. Most of us probably wear glasses or contacts or something, right? And people are colorblind. And so there's these standards set up for a color contrast, like, white on black is obviously the most. And you can run your colors through like these checkers that will tell you that. But so when you do that too, it just means that you're creating kind of better brand colors, better, like it helps with web accessibility, but it just also helps you create a good experience for anyone, whether they have problems Oh, I just had an alert come up. Sorry. Whether they have problems seeing or not. So I think that color is a huge one. So for your text, make sure it's not too gray. There's some themes that come with the text set that I think it's too light of a gray and you can't see it very well. So always make your text a bit darker. Your accent colors. A lot of people choose their brand colors that are really light, like kind of these pastels. I think we're moving out of that as a trend, but pastels are really hard to see for a lot of people, and especially on the web. And so you got to kind of think through that. And
I always think it's good to like take a step back from your computer and see if you can still read it.
Yeah.
And if you can't when you're a step back, then a lot of people are probably going to struggle with reading it just in general when they're trying to use your site like normal.
Yeah, and check on you check on different devices, right? So actually I got this new computer and I'm kind of frustrated because it has this blue tint on it that I can't get rid of. And so I already know that like the colors I'm seeing on this screen are not really what most people are going to see. But it's good to keep in mind that, and people change their settings too, right? Like, so they'll do weird things and they may be seeing your colors completely different than what you have them set as.
Yeah, my dad, we're a family company, so my dad and my mom both help me with stuff, and they're in the comments right now, helping post some of the links to your blog and everything. But whatever settings they have on their monitors, we will go back and forth, especially when we first started. That my dad would be like, I really can't tell the difference between these two things. Can you make this more apparent? I'm like, it's a big solid line. And like, so I take a screenshot of like mine and he'd be like, oh yeah, that's not what I see at all. Like the monitor settings are completely different. And now I have a 2 monitor setup. So I have one here and then one over here. And it's like when I'm checking colors, I drag it back and forth because they are very different than each other. And so I can kind of see like, oh, this is how it looks like on a washed out bright monitor. And here's how it looks on like a good Retina display, Mac Pro. But it's very, very different. And even on my cheap monitor, depending where on the screen it has different colors on it. And especially those things that don't have a high contrast, it can be really hard to read.
Yeah, that's what my screen's doing too, where it like at the top, it's a different color than the bottom. Yep. I'm very frustrated with it. Yeah, and there's like tools online you can search for that will help you kind of see some of these things too. But it is like if your monitor is showing a color differently, there's only so much you can do without looking at a different device for that. So just be aware. But kind of back to my point, like if you have your colors, the contrast levels that are recommended, that will take care of some of that, right? You're not going to be running into a situation where somebody just simply can't see it. There's also checkers for like color blindness. So you can kind of go through and see if somebody can't see reds or greens or whatever it is, what your site is going to look like. So I know there's already just on this one topic, there's a lot to think about. So I know it can feel really overwhelming, but you just need to like be aware of this and break everything down into steps and prioritize, what you want to work on.
And I know we'll get into this a little bit later, but like the key to usability isn't to be like, here's my list and here's what I need to fix. It's here's a list, here's the priorities, and then reassess everything and then come up with a new list and continue to do that over and over again. And that's how you can move forward. It's not this one-time thing that you're solved for the rest of eternity.
Yeah, because things are changing. We've both been around this stuff for quite a while, and things change, trends change, technology changes, requirements change. Like random things just break for no reason, right? Yep. And it's like you don't know why. So yeah, you have to kind of always keep coming back to this, and like the expectations of users change too, right? And your business changes, and so yeah.
When I got started, as long as your page loaded in the first like 10 seconds, people were excited, and that was like a fast loading page. And now Google is what, 0.2 seconds you need to have like your first and the new core web vitals.
Your first
it's like
content load or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like back in the day, we're all on dial-up, and if the page ever loaded, but then we were also putting things on there like music and like dancing graphics.
I do want to kind of work dancing graphics into my website again. I think it's coming back like bell bottoms.
I don't think any of that's true.
You're probably right. That and the blinking text tag.
I mean, they got rid of Flash, right? So
Yep. So when it comes to site speed these days, how can like a food blogger speed up their site without kind of eliminating their images or their kind of the step-by-step photos? There's so much heavy media we have on our pages these days that I feel like as a food blogger it can be hard to kind of decide what you want to eliminate.
I need to pause for a second because my husband went to pick up one of my kids, and I think so he's on spring break this week. Ephraim, I'll be right there. So he doesn't normally do this. He was supposed to take my other son, but left him here.
Okay. It is no problem.
I'm so sorry.
It's all right. The fun of doing live podcasts, as always, we have a good time because when life doesn't always make it easy on us.
Oh my God. Guys.
It is. I think we can all relate to having people around and doing things that we're not used to doing. Hey, what's this guy's name?
Here, let me take my thing off.
You're currently muted, so don't have sound. It says the mic's not connected.
There we go. Can you hear?
There we go. Yep.
I guess I have an assistant here.
What's his name?
What's your name?
Ephraim.
Ephraim.
Ah, nice to meet you.
Barb. Yeah.
It's completely fine. And if you want to do this some other time, we can, but I'm also fine doing this right now. Whatever's easiest for you.
Let's see what we can get through.
I mean, as you know, my audience is food bloggers, and I'm sure none of them can relate to having their children around unexpectedly right now.
I know. There's no other food bloggers with kids. So
yeah, sorry. I've never seen any on any Zoom calls or anything.
Oh, all right. What were you trying to ask me?
I was talking about site speed, that these days it is important to have a faster loading site. And especially for food bloggers, it can be really hard because we have step-by-step photos. We have larger photos than like my business blog is easy to speed up because I don't need many photos on it. What can food bloggers do to kind of speed up their site while not losing what makes, their sites visually appealing?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not like an expert on site speed at all, but I do think that prioritizing the things that you need on your blog, need in quotes, right? Because I do find a lot of people kind of just throw everything at it. Like, you have this thing on web stories, right, that you're doing. Is that, I know what they are, but is that something you actually load into like the page?
So there's two different ways. There's two different ways to do it. One is, at its most basic, a web story is a standalone page on your website. So it just uses different markup. It's similar to AMP pages, like the Accelerate mobile pages. And so it's just a unique URL on your site that's formatted in a specific way. And you can also embed them into other posts. And I know they don't slow down your site as far as being standalone stories because they're their own thing and they're pretty much optimized for mobile. But I know like Cadia Marketing from MediaWise has talked about that embedding them can slow down your site. So he suggests not doing that. But it does help with the user experience if you do like a companion web story that's kind of showing behind the scenes of the recipe or, some things that are actually interesting to the user. But
yeah, I mean, so it's like the way you use that term, it helps with the user experience. It's like, we're kind of talking about different things, right? If part of user experience is also site speed and it slows it down, it doesn't help with that part of user experience, right? So like that's a good example of kind of trying to figure out like how to prioritize what you're doing. And I don't see it nearly as much now, but for a while people were putting like their Instagram feed at the bottom of their sites, and that slows down site speed. And even the process shots, I know if you have like lazy loading and things, it's not as much of an issue as far as site speed with that. But just like people don't want to scroll through all of that, even if it's helpful for one person. But like you've got to prioritize what works well for you. And that's kind of the thing that we'll get into in a minute with this method that I've developed, is figuring out those things. You don't need all of these things. Yeah, like it might be good for someone somewhere or for some of your users, but you can't do everything. It takes so much time for you. It slows down your page. Like you got to prioritize what you want to do. Like there's really this trend that feels like you have to put everything ever, right? Like all these process shots, table of contents, just so much content on there. And like, that's just not always needed, you know? I don't think that's all serving whoever your user is the best. Like you need to be able to filter that information and tell them what's most important for telling your story about that recipe, for what's most important for your brand. I mean, not all recipes need detailed process shots, right? A lot of this is coming from ad networks too, that are saying, because Google says like word count length isn't a ranking factor. And it's not. It's like whatever communicates it the best. But ad networks are the ones saying you need to make your content longer so you can put in more ads. And I understand that's how a lot of people monetize. But I mean, kind of the premise of your whole thing, Jason, is that there's other ways to monetize, right?
Yep, look, moving beyond the ad network. And Google puts so much weight now behind people having accessible sites, about having the right content there and people staying on your site and engaging, that I think trying to make sure that you're providing the best experience to them is a good way to help your overall SEO.
Yeah, I mean, like rather than keeping people on that same page, to me it makes more sense to like really think about related links or other things that they may click over to. Look what you found. You found a pretty nice post, huh?
And it's shiny.
And it's shiny.
Very nice. That's good user experience right there, that it's pretty and shiny.
Yes. And loud.
So you talk about the GEAR method that you've been working on putting together. Can you kind of talk about what GEAR stands for?
Yes, so this is a method I developed to help really people, like if you want to apply user experience, like I was talking about, to your own business, your own products, your food blog, right? So GEAR is an acronym, and the first is for gather. So that talks about gathering data, doing surveys, things like that. And we'll talk about these more in depth, right? And then E is examine. So that's analyzing, interpreting the data that you gathered. And then A is for apply. If I can spell, I always get lost in the middle. I'm like, what are the next letters? A is for, I'm on A, right? A is for apply. So you have to then apply and figure out how to prioritize what you found out from your research, right? And then the last one is R for reevaluate. So you already mentioned this, kind of going back in and figuring it out. And like, this is a process you kind of need to go through, like once a year or so, right? And you can do it. I mean, we'll talk about it a bit, but
our backyard.
Yeah, our backyard's back there, huh?
So when it comes to gathering data, what type of data are we talking about here?
So, I mean, there's an unlimited amount of data that you can gather, right? So it really gets into it. I think that doing surveys, and you can do them in depth, you can do them not so in depth. Like I really like using Instagram stories to just ask simple questions. So like if you're going through this method, what are
I feel
you
like we're getting
saying?
a good inside behind the scenes look at what you were talking about at your dinner table.
Yes, that is true. So okay, so back to the start a little bit. Okay.
So big.
Can you be quiet while I talk for a second?
No.
No, he says no, he can't.
Sounds right. At least he's honest.
So the gear method is good for. Seriously, can you go over there?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. You can do this as like a big whole thing that you apply to like kind of your whole business, or like looking at your blog, take your whole blog through this. You can also do it for just kind of like smaller parts of things. Like if you're creating a call to action or whatever, you can go through these steps and it won't be as in depth or complicated, right? So yeah, if you're looking at gathering data, surveys, I think like Instagram stories is a great way to do those. You can create longer ones using Google Forms. I like, if you're doing that, try to come up with questions that are both open-ended and ones where you kind of have set answers, because you'll get better feedback that way if you have both of those types.
For
so
someone
that
that's interested in doing some of this data gathering, what are some types of questions that they should start with? If they've never done this before and they're starting from scratch, what are some good ones that can help them kind of hit some of those top priority items, perhaps?
I mean, so a lot of this depends on your goals too. And that's, I have a free guide you can download on this. I'll probably explain it more clearly than I am right now. So some of it will depend on your goals, on what you are trying to do with your blog, on if you're running this for a specific product you're trying to develop or something. And there's a couple different ways. Like you can ask questions that are more kind of like feeling based and asked about struggles. You can say like, what's your biggest frustration when you're trying to cook dinner? What would make cooking dinner easier for you? Right? You can do kind of that. You can also ask, I like asking questions about how people use technology is a good one. Like when you want to find a recipe on the web, do you, like once you found it, do you print it out or do you bookmark it? You know, things like that will really tell you too how people are using it. You can, like, there's a lot of examples of questions that you can just Google and kind of make your own. It is hard to just kind of like blanket statement say, but I would say like give some thought to it, because the more thought you kind of put in it and kind of rephrase your questions so it makes sense for the answers that you want, like you want to lead people through it, right? So you might kind of structure the questions in a way that like the first question sort of gives them the answer to the next question.
Mommy, can you help me?
I'll be right there. So yeah, like just
Makes sense.
I lost my train of thought, but I think it is mostly done with that. And I think Google Forms is a good one to use for that. I did try to use Typeform on my most recent one, but if you're focused on web accessibility, it's not really the best for that. Like it kind of makes things prettier, but that also makes it actually harder to use sometimes. So I think sticking with Google Forms, and then on those surveys, you can email them out. Email them out more than once for like a few weeks. Send it to your list, or social media, post it there. You can also post if you're trying to get, like I posted in Jason's group a survey that I just had, a Facebook group. So yeah, like reach out to other, Facebook groups are a great place that you can post surveys to maybe get some information not from your audience. Again, depending what your goals are, if you're researching a new product, you would do that. If you're just trying to figure out how people use your specific blog, you probably wouldn't do that.
For Amazing Food Made Easy, I wanted to figure out where the biggest pain points were for people using my site and people using sous vide cooking. And so I used a Google form, which worked really well. And my main question was, what's your biggest challenge when it comes to using sous vide? And so that really opened it up, that kind of open-ended, people could put in everything from like cooking a steak through 4 paragraphs of text talking about the big issues that they were having. And that was the most valuable question for me. But then I also had some of those multiple choice ones, like how often do you use sous vide? What type of circulator do you use? What type of sealing do you use for your sous vide, to kind of get a good coverage of like what my fans are using, how they're using sous vide in their kitchen, and what they're struggling with. And then that's where I could really take those struggles that they were running into and develop content and products around that. That's what how I approach the G of the gear process, I think.
Yeah. Well, and then there's a lot of other ways, like with Google Analytics, which we're probably all somewhat familiar with, right? You can pull a lot of data out of there. I'm not sure. It's for Daddy's guitar. You can also use things like Hotjar, which will do a heat map on your site and tell you like how far users scroll down. It'll tell you like where people are clicking. You can also use that to put questions, like survey questions, actually on your site. There's this question called the Net Promoter Score. Have you heard of that before?
No, I have not.
It basically is just like, it's been tested, and so they kind of know how this metric works. And so it basically says, like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to recommend this site to someone else? And then there's this whole system for scoring it.
Nice.
But like, that's what, if you use something like Hotjar, I'd suggest putting that question on your site and having people just answer. Just pop up and say, how likely are you to recommend this site to someone else? And based on those answers, you get kind of this overall feel of how happy they are with your brand and your site. So, there's a lot that can be done with this. And I think, setting this stuff up first obviously makes the other pieces easier to fill in. The better the questions you're asking, the more data you're understanding with your goals. So I also talk about kind of trying to set up your goals. Okay, that's not something for right now, okay? When you're going into this, really the first step should be setting up your goals. Because then you know what types of questions you're going to ask, and you know what you're looking for. If you're just like, when you're really first starting, I'll help you later. When you're really just first starting out, you may need to just kind of ask whatever questions because you don't even know yet, right? But as you get more into it, you'll be like, I'm doing this specific thing. This is the information I want to know.
That makes a lot of sense. So we've gathered the data. We've looked at the data to see, where we need to kind of focus our efforts. How do we then go on to the A? How do we know what we should start applying and attacking, basically, to start improving?
So E is next.
So sorry. I thought we talked about I thought we talked about how to examine it. My bad.
That's okay. But it brings up a good point for me. So I'm glad you did that, because I think a lot of people do skip to just the apply. Like, they kind of see the data. They don't really think about the interpreting and analyzing of it very much. Like, they don't go deep into that stuff. They're like, oh, this is what it says. And they just move on, right? So I do think the examine part is very important, because if you don't spend time doing that, you may draw the wrong conclusions, right?
I can do that, yeah.
You don't want to do that. You don't want to create this whole product based on something you kind of misunderstood that somebody said in a survey, or maybe you didn't have enough people answer your survey to get the correct results, or whatever it is, right? So in the examine step, you analyze and interpret your data. So you should look through and see if there's themes that are popping up, if there's any contradictions within the data. or any kind of surprises or contradictions to what you thought should be happening. If you see some of those things, you need to be like, maybe I need to go back to the first step and collect more data on this, right? So if you're getting answers in your survey and you're like, I totally didn't think this was a thing, you might need to create another survey and ask more about that, right? So within this, I also think like looking at external sources and benchmarks is really important too. So like on email is a good example of this, like open rates. When people first start sending emails out and they find out that their open rates are, I've even heard people with 50, 60% open rates that are like, oh my gosh, so many people aren't opening my email. Those of us who've been doing it a long time know that a 60% open rate is really, really, really good, right? So that's where like understanding this data compared to like industry benchmarks is really important, because you might be doing really good, right? Like clicks on a call to action, those may vary between 1% to 5%, right? But when you first set them up, you're like, oh man, I thought it'd be like everybody would click on my call to action. So just understanding like what the benchmarks are for these things, so you can see if you're actually where you're supposed to be. So you don't jump in and say, man, I really need to change this because it's so low. But actually you're exceeding where every other food blogger is, right? But you just don't know. And it's hard in food blogging because there's not always a lot of benchmarks out there for food bloggers specifically. Like that's one thing I'd love to work on, hopefully, is kind of like creating some of these like benchmarks for food bloggers, so we do like know what to compare to.
Yeah, it's a lot easier when you know kind of what the standard is for the industry or even the niche that you're in, because that can vary,
Yeah.
the data a lot as well. So it does definitely make sense to kind of check that out and see, like you said, you don't want to try to improve your open rates if you're sitting at 40%, because you're probably already crushing that aspect of it, and it's going to be hard to improve that. You can focus on some of the things you're struggling at and get more kind of return on your benefit there.
Yeah, or if your rate's really low and you thought it was good, it's like, and there's all, you can get into it a lot with it, but I think definitely like taking some time to actually look at your data, like go through it thoughtfully, and then make sure you are comparing some of this to other benchmarks and looking at if there's a similar product, kind of looking at what they do and that sort of thing. So then you can move ahead to the next step, which is apply. Did you have any other questions? Now I'm like the interview host. Did you have any other questions on that, Jason?
No, I think that's good for examine. And I'm curious to see, how do you apply it? How do you kind of prioritize what to attack first? And, how do you go about applying it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing to do is, like, depending what all you've done with it, like, sit down and kind of write out the different things that you found that you want to make changes to or whatever. And then find things first that are quick fixes, right? Like there's some things like changing the font color on your site is usually a pretty easy fix, right? Like do something like that does not take a lot of time. Kind of prioritize the things like, okay, this will be really quick. And then from there, like you will have to kind of look at your goals and say, okay, my goal right now, like my actual goal right now is building my audience. So I would prioritize things that I see a direct connection to building my audience, right? Like that's what I want to do. I also talk about using this method. There's so many different things called the heart method. I've talked about this before if anybody's heard me elsewhere. But that takes you kind of through some UX measurements. And so you can pick one of those categories. Like if you want to work on happiness is the first one. So like making sure that people are happier with your site, you'll prioritize doing those things. Or if it's like retention, food bloggers are not great with that, right? Like I'd say that's probably one that will come up for a lot of food bloggers is retaining people not only on your site, but like as customers, making sure they come back. So getting them on your email list, those sorts of things. So you're going to have to decide your goals, and then you can prioritize some of these things that you're going to do. And I mean, some of them you also might want to look at hiring experts to do for you. That may be much more beneficial. With site speed, you can hire somebody to make some drastic improvements for you if you're really having a hard time with it. Like it's not going to cost usually a ton of money to get some of those things fixed. And so just kind of really like looking through all of that and making those decisions, because you can't do everything right now. Do the quick fixes right now, and then prioritize like what else you can do based on your business goals.
That makes a lot of sense. So just you need to look at what your goals are and kind of pick an area and try to improve that. And if you need to find an expert, then you can find an expert to kind of jumpstart that process. Because as food bloggers, we do a lot of stuff, but we're not experts, especially in a lot of the tech aspects. And it's a lot faster to hire someone, and you'll have a good return on your investment if you are going to increase your SEO from it, or if you're going to have people that are going to be on your site more, or buy your products, or click on your ads even more. You can definitely services can pay for themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because some of this stuff can get like, you'll see, oh, I really need to do whatever. Can you hear the guitar he's playing?
Yeah, we might have to have that as our background music for all of our podcasts.
Well, yeah, you can have it. Like, it's not copyrighted anywhere, so.
He hasn't sold the rights to it yet?
Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, I think like I do this too all the time. I'm like, I'll do it myself. And it's like, just spend a little money to get an expert to help you with a few of these things. Or like, if you really want to do it yourself and learn it, there's courses and things out there on everything possible. So
once you've done that and you've fixed the main things that you wanted to fix, then we get to the reevaluate stage, right?
Yeah. So I think like if you're going through this whole method for your blog, for your business, I think once a year is a good time to like really delve into it. And once you have it set up, and this is something I offer a service for, I can kind of go through and help you get it set up and give you like a spreadsheet that has all this listed. If you have all of that, it's not that hard the next year to go back through all of this. Like the first time it's going to be harder, right? Because you're learning the process, you're setting up the spreadsheets, you're like figuring it all out. But subsequently to that, like it'll hopefully just be something that gets really integrated into your systems that you do. So the whole thing, I think, should be done once a year. Quarterly, you're going to want to maybe check in on some of your main goals, maybe, put a survey out here or there, kind of like dig deeper into Google Analytics for something, right? Just make sure you're on task. And then every month, which I know a lot of people do already, monthly, you should be tracking some like key performance indicators for this sort of thing and just keeping track with that. So, I just keep in mind kind of a UX perspective with some of that, like if I'm seeing a drop, like what's going on with that, and kind of go through this process and say like, okay, like I'm going to examine where this is coming from, and I'm going to then apply solutions to this. So
because you can do this process for your overall site, but you can also do it for like a very specific aspect of your site, or even if it's, why am I not getting enough opens on my newsletter? You can dive into that specific question using this method to gather the data, examine it, find the solutions, apply them, and then reassess it.
I feel so bad though. Are you going to be able to use any of this audio for your podcast?
It will be just fine. It is not
like a video. It's a little better because like they can kind of see what's going on too.
Well, cool. I love learning about the gear method. I think it's a great way to look at usability and user experience, and a good way for people to learn how to approach it, because it is such a valuable component of moving your blog forward and getting the most out of it, especially once you have determined your goals. That's a quick way to start moving forward on them, is to, survey your audience and see what they're struggling with, and how you can kind of serve that a little bit better.
Yeah. I think I'm just seeing the value of like asking questions of my audience more and more, and asking. I mean, like Instagram stories or something, it's so easy to just put something up there, and then it helps your engagement on stories anyway,
Yeah.
So if you can just find quick little things and just get in the habit of doing that, it's kind of a win-win for everyone, because people like talking about themselves and answering surveys and things. So yeah, I just want to go back also to like Hotjar. I don't think that most food bloggers use something like that. I mean, it's free up to, I don't remember the like amount of page views, but they have a free level. Like just put that on your site and see what people are doing. Like see how far they're scrolling and where they click. It's really, really helpful information.
Yeah, especially if you have sales pages, it's super helpful for those two to see where you're losing people that you're trying to get their email addresses or get them to sign up for lead magnets.
I mean, they're not scrolling all the way down. I guarantee that. So,
yeah, that was one of our big takeaways. We worked really hard on very long sales pages, and there's like 80% of the people just clicked on the first "I want this" link and didn't even scroll more. So we still had longer ones because I didn't want to alienate those last 20%, but it's we focused a lot more on that top 80%, and the last 20% was a lot less important than we thought.
Yeah, I don't understand why like those long sales pages are so much a thing, because people don't want to read that much. They don't scroll that far down. I mean, sometimes it's helpful. Like if I really want to research a product or something, maybe I will like read all the way through, but usually no.
Well, Bethany, I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate having the guest appearance. That was fun. If people want more from you, they can check you out at Cadia Marketing on all social media channels, or check out your blog at foodblogusability.com. And like you said, you have a free guide for both web accessibility and the gear method at foodblogusability.com/freebies. I really appreciate you coming on Makin Bacon.
Yes, thank you for having me and my kid.
Of course, the more the merrier. And thanks to everyone in the comments and who is listening. Remember, you can join us live every Thursday when we record these episodes. You can ask the guest questions, talk to the other cooks in the comments, and even see our smiling faces. Join us Thursdays at makethatbacon.com/live, or search for Makin Bacon on your favorite podcast platform. This has been Makin Bacon. We're all about helping you serve your fans, grow your income, and get the most out of your blog. Till next time, I'm Jason Logston. See y'all next Thursday.